Hey guys, I will start a new series from next video. Till then, enjoy the Necromancer of the Shadows. Leopold looked at the object that Alaric took out and his eyes opened wide in shock. The item in question was a small black-colored stone, filled with thousands of tiny shining stars. Enlightenment stone, Leopold exclaimed in a shocked voice, trying his best to contain his excitement. Alaric smiled at Leopold's shocked reaction and his eyes shone with cunningness. I found this enlightenment stone a few years ago, the fox spoke and placed the stone in front of Leopold. I don't need this stone, but this stone can solve my problem, huh? Leopold finished Alaric's sentence and looked at the enlightenment stone with a thoughtful expression. Yes, Alaric smiled upon hearing Leopold. Now you just have to announce that you have captured the culprit of the robbery. To prove you are not lying, you can auction this enlightenment stone, claiming that you retrieved it from the thieves. Alaric paused after saying this and continued after a moment. If you use this method, you won't even have to remove the bounty on their heads, as people will think that the thieves who stole the enlightenment stone are already dead. At the same time, you can attract many people to your auction house by auctioning this enlightenment stone, restoring some of the lost reputation of your auction house. Leopold listened to everything that Alaric said and he had to admit that his idea was quite good. However, there were still some problems. Like what if once he announced that he had captured the robbers and executed them, but after some time, someone caught them? If someone catches Evan and Cedar after he announces to the world that he has executed them, wouldn't he become a laughingstock in front of all the people? Though it is not a big thing and I have many ways to avoid this kind of problem, Leopold thought while furrowing his eyebrows, because there was another thing that made him reluctant to go with Alaric's plan. If I accept his offer, I will lose my reason to send my subordinates to search for the entrance of the secret realm. The reason he told Alaric to send his subordinates to look for the secret realm was to capture Evan and Cedar so that he could restore the reputation of his auction house. But if he accepts his offer, most of his problems will be solved. The people who are throwing dirt on him by saying he couldn't even capture 2 low-level core evolvers would close their mouths, and by auctioning the enlightenment stone, he would be able to attract many people, restoring the reputation of his auction house to some extent. He also wanted to restore the reputation of his auction house, but at the same time, he didn't want to lose the opportunity to explore a new realm that wasn't explored by many people in the past. Seeing Leopold's furrowed eyebrows, Alaric sneered inwardly because he could easily guess what he was thinking. It is very easy to deceive the greedy people, Alaric thought inwardly and said with a small smile on his face. I know what you are thinking, but you don't have to worry about that. Even if you accept my offer, I will still allow your subordinates to look for the entrance of the secret realm in the dark forest. Hearing Alaric, Leopold snapped out of his thoughts and looked at him with a slight surprise on his face, as he didn't expect the fox to know what he was thinking. What's with that surprised look? Alaric asked while rolling his eyes when he saw Leopold's surprised expression. I have known you for a long time, so it's not hard to guess what you're thinking. Hearing Alaric's sarcasm-filled voice, Leopold looked at him without saying anything. After a minute of silence, he finally opened his mouth and asked, Why? Why are you allowing me to send my subordinates to look for the entrance when you know what I am thinking? Hearing Leopold, Alaric smiled and said in a serious voice, Isn't it obvious? I am giving you permission because of our friendship. Leopold's mouth opened slightly when he heard Alaric, and he felt perhaps this fox wasn't as bad as he thought. But this momentary good impression shattered instantly when he heard Alaric's next words. As we are old friends, I am sure even if you found something good inside that secret realm, you would definitely share it with me, right? Leopold looked at Alaric, who was staring at him with a foxy smile, and his mouth twitched uncontrollably. He wanted to curse the old fox, but he knew that it wasn't appropriate, so he took a deep breath and nodded his head with a forced smile on his face. Of course, since we are friends, it is obvious that I will share the things that I will find in the secret realm with you. Good, Alaric smiled upon hearing Leopold and pointed at the enlightenment stone that was on the tea table. So, are you going to proceed with my plan? Leopold didn't immediately answer and looked at the fist-sized enlightenment stone. After a few seconds of silence, he opened his mouth and asked, How much? Alaric smiled when he heard Leopold and said in a warm voice, Since we are old friends, I will give you a discount. You can take this enlightenment stone with you for just 150 million high-level essence stones. Cough cough. Leopold choked on the tea he was drinking and looked at Alaric with his eyes wide open. He shakily pointed his finger towards Alaric and wanted to say something, but no words came out of his mouth. After a few seconds of silence, he gritted his teeth and asked in an angry voice, "Are you kidding me?" Alaric shook his head hearing Leopold and explained how he would be able to restore the reputation of his business and stop his competitors from throwing dirt on him. Fuck, so this is what it felt like to be exploited by someone, Leopold thought inwardly with an ugly look on his face as most of the time, he was the one who exploits other people. But the current situation was very favorable to Alaric and honestly, he would have also tried to squeeze out as much money as possible from the person if he were in his shoes. 110 million, that's the best I can offer you, Leopold said while gritting his teeth after a long negotiation. Hearing Leopold, Alaric looked at him with a conflicted look on his face, but in the end, he sighed and nodded his head. All right, since we are old friends, I will sell it to you at a cheap price. Leopold nearly attacked Alaric when he heard him but stopped when he heard the sound of someone laughing from the side. He looked sideways and saw the woman with red hair laughing and looking at them with an amused expression on her face. Seeing even a lowly servant was laughing at him, Leopold's face darkened and he asked in a cold voice, "What are you laughing at, you bitch?" Seeing even a lowly servant was laughing at him, Leopold's face darkened and he asked in a cold voice, "What are you laughing at, you bitch?" The moment Leopold finished speaking, an absolute silence descended inside Alaric's hidden realm. Even the fishes in the pond, the butterflies and small birds flying from one tree to another stopped and looked in Leopold's direction with slightly open mouths. Alaric was also stupefied when he heard what Leopold said, but he quickly regained his senses and looked towards Anastasia, who had a small smile on her face. Fuck, although there was a small smile on her face, Alaric couldn't help but curse and sweat profusely. You know, dickhead, if you had cursed me like this in the past, I would have sealed you in the world of nightmares for a few thousand years. But since I am in a good mood, I will let you off this time, Anastasia said with a smile on her face. Now, if you don't want me to cut off your limp dick-like body into two, then you better screw off from here before I change my mind. Alaric and Leopold were dumbfounded when they heard Anastasia and both of them looked at the red-haired woman with shocked expressions. However, the reasons they were feeling shocked were completely different from each other. Alaric was shocked because he couldn't believe an unreasonable woman like Anastasia, who used to start beating people at the slightest provocation, was letting off Leopold, who had just called her a bitch. Is it because she can't use her full power? Alaric thought and found it plausible. He didn't know why Anastasia had less than half of her original powers, but he thought the reason she didn't do anything to Leopold was because of this. Well, even though this greedy vampire is quite weak among the rank 5 people, it still won't be easy for her to beat him with less than half of her powers, Alaric thought and sighed in relief because when Leopold cursed her earlier, he thought she would kill Leopold, and if she did, it would become a troublesome matter because of Leopold's connection with the higher-ups of the Blood Moon Empire. While Alaric was shocked that instead of killing, Anastasia just gave Leopold a warning, Leopold was shocked because he couldn't believe a mere servant dared to call him a dickhead and even compare his beautiful body to a limp dick. Because Anastasia didn't have her full power, the aura around her was quite chaotic, so Leopold couldn't tell what her rank was. Even though he couldn't determine her rank, he felt her current powers were weaker than his. Because he was a businessman, his skin was quite thick and if someone stronger than him said something bad about him, he would swallow his pride and listen to them without retaliating, just like earlier when he didn't say anything when Alaric pressed his subordinate to the ground and said it was very easy for him to kill him. But this logic only applied to people stronger than him, so when Anastasia, who in his eyes was weaker than him, called him a dickhead, his face turned red from anger. Dark Star, teach this bitch a lesson, Leopold said in an anger-filled voice while looking at Anastasia with his deep red eyes. The moment he spoke, the man in black clothes who was standing behind him disappeared. When Alaric saw what was happening, he wanted to stop Dark Star, but he suddenly felt something and saw Anastasia looking at him with a slight grin on her face, as if telling him not to do anything. Seeing Anastasia's grin, Alaric stopped and decided not to intervene. However, just in case, he still deployed his power throughout the Hidden Realm, as he knew that Dark Star was one of the best assassins throughout Utopia and he had even killed 2 rank 5 core evolvers in the past. After deploying his powers, Alaric was easily able to see Dark Star, who seemed to merge with the surroundings perfectly. Anastasia didn't show any concern when Leopold told Dark Star to teach her a lesson and sat in the same place as before. Suddenly, Alaric's expression changed because he felt a strange power surging inside Anastasia's body. If they weren't inside his hidden realm, he wouldn't have felt it, but since they were inside the hidden realm that was completely under his control, he was able to sense it. Leopold wasn't able to feel this power and was looking at Anastasia with hate-filled eyes. Suddenly, Anastasia lifted one of her fingers slightly and tapped on the ground not far away from her. Both Leopold and Alaric were confused when Anastasia suddenly tapped her finger on the ground and didn't understand what she was doing, but not even a second later, the place she tapped her finger on started to darken and the dark area soon took the shape of a shadow. When Leopold and Alaric looked at the shape of the shadow, they were stupefied because they realized the shape of the shadow was similar to Dark Star. What the? Leopold opened his mouth to say something, but before he could finish speaking, the space at the right side of Anastasia blurred a little and slowly, Dark Star appeared there. Even though Dark Star's face was hidden behind his black clothes, both Alaric and Leopold could see his eyes were wide open and he was looking at Anastasia with terror-filled eyes. Dark Star, wah, drip, drip. Leopold wanted to ask Dark Star what he was doing, but suddenly, he heard the sound of something dripping. He moved his gaze in the direction of the sound and soon saw something that made his eyes open wide in shock. Alaric also looked in the direction of the sound and similar to Leopold, his eyes also widened in shock when he saw that at some point, without them realizing, a small hole had appeared in Dark Star's chest where his heart was located, and blood was dripping to the ground from that hole. When Leopold ordered Dark Star to attack her, Anastasia was quite surprised as she did not expect that the limp dick vampire would have the courage to attack her. Just from a single look, she could tell that unlike the dickhead vampire, the man in black clothes was quite powerful. Although Dark Star was just at the peak of rank 4, not even at rank 5, using her status as the progenitor of the Shadow Dragons, she could tell that even a rank 5 core evolver would have a hard time fighting against Dark Star because of his powerful stealth skills. Though the man was powerful, Anastasia didn't put him in her eyes because almost all of the stealth-type skills were useless in front of her. Moreover, even though she had less than half of her original powers because she left most of her powers with the essence clone inside the Shadow Realm, she had enough confidence that she could defeat any rank 4 core evolver. Only rank 5 and rank 6 core evolvers could give her trouble, and even when facing high-level core evolvers, she had many trump cards that she had created while staying in the Shadow Realm for the past few thousand years. Anastasia long since knew that one day she would have to leave the Shadow Realm, but in order to do so, she would have to create a powerful essence clone and leave most of her powers behind. She had many enemies in Utopia, so she was aware that leaving the Shadow Realm with less than half of her powers would be quite dangerous for her. Therefore, to avoid trouble after leaving the Shadow Realm, she created some techniques that would help her. One of the techniques that she created while she was inside the Shadow Realm was spirit resonance. To create an essence clone, people have to plant a very small part of their soul inside it. But in Anastasia's case, she had to plant more than half of her soul inside the essence clone she had left in the Shadow Realm because it had to bear the pressure of the partial authority of the Shadow Realm, and it was impossible without strong spiritual power. Because of creating this essence clone, it wouldn't be wrong to say that the current Anastasia only had 25 to 30% of her original powers. But using the spirit resonance technique that she created, she can create a temporary link with the part of her soul that she planted inside the essence clone and use that link to burn the spiritual power of the soul that she left inside Shadow Realm to boost her powers. Burning her spiritual powers is naturally a very dangerous thing to do, and if something goes wrong while using this technique, her soul will be severely damaged, and in the worst case, she will fall into a deep slumber, or worse, the part of her soul that she has left inside the Shadow Realm will be completely destroyed. The only reason Anastasia even created this technique was because of the healing factor of the Shadow Realm, which was very effective in healing souls. Because of having partial authority over the Shadow Realm, she could use its power to heal her soul in case something went wrong while using this technique. But obviously, if she overused this technique, then even with the healing factor of the Shadow Realm, the consequences would be dire. Although this technique was quite dangerous, if she used it in moderation with perfect control, it could improve her powers greatly. Although Anastasia created this technique, she never got the chance to use it, so when Dark Star attacked her, she signaled Alaric, who wanted to stop Dark Star not to do anything since she wanted to test it. As she activated the spirit resonance technique, she felt a connection with the second part of her soul that was inside the Shadow Realm, and through the link, the moment she burned the spiritual power of the essence clone, a surge of power filled her body, bringing her powers to around 70% of her original powers. She could already feel Dark Star's presence even before she used spirit resonance to increase her powers, but after increasing her power, she could even see him clearly even though he was hiding using his stealth skill. Looking at Dark Star's position, she calculated the place where his shadow would have been created if he wasn't invisible and tapped there using one of her skills that could directly damage people through their shadows. Anastasia tapped her finger right at the chest area of Dark Star's shadow where his heart was located and pressed her finger without using too much force. Although she didn't use too much force, Dark Star, who was ready to attack her, felt as if someone had plunged a knife inside his chest, and the knife was just a millimeter away from stabbing his heart. Feeling the fear of looming death, Dark Star came out of stealth mode and looked at Anastasia with eyes full of terror. He glanced at the place Anastasia tapped her finger earlier and noticed her finger was right at the place where he was feeling pain in his chest, and the fear he was feeling intensified. The most shocking thing that he felt was that even though he dropped to his knees after coming out of his stealth, his shadow was still frozen on the ground in the same position as when he was invisible. Anastasia did not care about Dark Star since she never put him in her eyes, so after taking care of him, she instead focused on the link she created using spirit resonance. Feeling the condition of the soul that was inside her essence clone, Anastasia frowned. 1 minute or 1 minute and 10 seconds if I push my spiritual power to its limit. If I use spirit resonance longer than that, even with the help of the Shadow Realm, it will become difficult to heal my soul, Anastasia muttered with a frown on her face as the time limit was way shorter than she expected. But thinking about how she was actually creating a soul link from billions of kilometers away, she realized it was natural that she wouldn't be able to use this power for long with her limited spiritual powers. Well, 1 minute is also not bad, Anastasia thought and shook her head slightly. Just when she was thinking about her technique, she heard Leopold's voice and her eyes turned ice cold. Alaric, what do you think you are doing? I know this is your hidden realm and you can control everything here. Do you think I won't realize you are helping that SLT using your powers? Do you want to break our business partnership because of that S*X doll of yours? The moment Leopold stopped speaking, Alaric didn't even get a chance to say anything when everyone present inside the hidden realm felt a chill run down their spines. Anastasia, Alaric quickly looked towards Anastasia to say something as he knew she was the source of the chill he just felt, but his words stuck inside his throat when he looked at her and saw her eyes had changed into glowing violet draconic eyes. Looking into those eyes, he felt as if he was looking at a top predator that could devour him at any moment. Leopold was the one who was the most affected by the pressure since Anastasia's gaze was fixed on him. When the vampire looked at Anastasia and saw her glowing purple eyes, his face turned deathly pale and his body started to shake. Suddenly, Leopold's instincts started to scream and urged him to move his body. His instincts were screaming at him that if he didn't move, he would die. Feeling the sense of death, Leopold mustered all of his power and moved his body slightly. The moment he moved his body slightly, slash, arg, a sharp black light flashed, red blood spurted out and one of Leopold's arms was cut off. While screaming in pain and horror, Leopold quickly stepped away because he realized if he hadn't moved his body at the last second, instead of his arm, it would have been his head that would have been cut off. After moving away, Leopold turned around and looked behind him to see who attacked him, and the moment he looked back, his pale face turned even paler because he realized the attacker was actually his own shadow, which had somehow come to life and was standing behind him while holding a scythe in its hands. What is this?" Leopold asked, fear filling his eyes as he looked at his own shadow, which had come to life and was standing while holding a scythe. The black shadow didn't answer Leopold's question and swung its scythe in his direction, wanting to reap his life. Once again, Leopold's instinct screamed in horror and he immediately ducked down while holding his severed arm to stop the bleeding. The moment Leopold ducked down, a sharp black light shot out from the shadow's scythe, barely missing his head. Leopold gulped down his saliva in fear as he couldn't understand what was going on. But soon, he noticed the aura of the shadow decreased greatly after its last attack and it was slowly fading away. Seeing the shadow fading, Leopold thought it was his chance to attack it, but before he could do anything, a red-haired woman appeared in front of him in the next second. Boom! Leopold received a powerful punch in his guts that created sonic waves, and he flew backwards as if he had been hit by a bullet train. Bang! With a loud bang, the vampire crashed a few kilometers away and continued to cough out mouthfuls of blood with his internal organs mixed in it. Alaric was stupefied by the sudden turn of events. Earlier, when Leopold called Anastasia a bitch, he thought she didn't attack him because she didn't have her full power, but looking at the way she was beating Leopold, now he realized he was completely wrong. Although he really wanted to know how she could beat Leopold like this with her limited power, he knew it wasn't the time to think about it. From the way Anastasia was attacking, he was sure that she wanted to kill Leopold because of what he said earlier and he couldn't let that happen. The vampires from the Bloodmoon Empire won't let it slide if a rank 5 core evolver dies here. Alaric thought aloud and immediately appeared in front of Anastasia, who was going toward Leopold. Stop, stop, you can't kill him or there will be. Shut up, Alaric. No matter what you say, I'm going to kill this vampire bastard today. Anastasia didn't let Alaric finish what he was saying and shouted in a voice filled with anger. Alaric wanted to say something, but before he could, he saw that she disappeared from his sight and appeared in front of Leopold, smashing his face using her fists. Fast. Alaric was baffled when Anastasia suddenly disappeared from his sight because he wasn't able to see how she moved. He was once again surprised as he couldn't understand how she increased her powers so much, but he stopped thinking about it when he saw Anastasia had cut off Leopold's second arm as well. Arg! Leopold screamed in pain and looked at the red-haired woman who tossed away his severed arm with an absolute look of horror. His face was completely disfigured because of her earlier punches and almost all of his teeth were broken. I gave you a chance to screw off earlier, but you just had to open your filthy mouth once again. Anastasia said and stomped down on one of his feet, turning his leg bones into dust. Arg! Leopold screamed in pain and wanted to back away, but tens of black hands came out of the ground and held him in one place, stopping him from moving away. In your next life, think 100 times before you open your mouth to say something, Anastasia said in a cold voice, and a black cleaver that was nearly 2 meters long appeared in her hand. The cleaver's blade was engraved with hundreds of mysterious runes and had a silver golden colored handle. The moment Anastasia took out the cleaver, a dangerous aura filled the entire hidden realm. Leopold's entire body trembled when he saw the black cleaver and a feeling of death engulfed his body. Anastasia looked at Leopold, who was shaking in fear with a cold look on her face, and lifted the cleaver. But before she could slash down, a magic circle appeared below Leopold and he disappeared from there. Anastasia's eyes narrowed when she saw this and she looked back. Upon looking back, she saw Leopold lying unconscious behind Alaric. What are you trying to do, Allah? I should be the one asking you. What do you think you are doing, Anastasia? Are you out of your mind? Alaric didn't let Anastasia finish her sentence and asked in a serious voice. You should know the consequences of killing him. He is a damn rank 5 core evolver. Do you think the vampires will take it lightly if you kill him here? You know that the relationship between me and the Bloodmoon Empire is not good since they want to take over the Dark Forest and assimilate it into their territory. The moment you kill this guy, they will use it as an excuse to wage war against the Dark Forest. Anastasia was stunned when she heard Alaric's serious voice and some rationality returned to her eyes. She took some deep breaths to calm down and lowered her cleaver. I know you are angry, but you should calm down because killing him will bring trouble not just for us but even for him since he is also living in the Dark Forest. Anastasia closed her eyes for a second, and when she opened them again, her glowing violet draconic eyes returned to normal black. She put away her cleaver and walked towards Leopold. 10 seconds. She sensed the condition of her soul and noticed she could use spirit resonance only for 10 more seconds. What are you doing? Alaric was alarmed when he saw her walking towards Leopold as he thought she still wanted to kill him. Calm your tits, I am not going to kill him, Anastasia said and arrived in front of Leopold. This woman, she really doesn't have a filter inside her mouth, Alaric thought with the twitching mouth, but when he saw what Anastasia was doing, his eyes opened wide in shock. Alaric watched with his eyes wide open as Anastasia placed one of her hands on Leopold's head and muttered some strange words. Soon, a dark black, ominous-looking magic circle appeared above Leopold's face and sank inside his skin. Anastasia panted heavily once the magic circle sank inside Leopold's face and tossed his body towards Dark Star, who was lying unconscious on the ground. Heal them and use your skill to alter their memories, she said to Alaric and finally stopped using the spirit resonance technique. Screech. Suddenly, Biscuit screeched loudly, forcing Evan to open his eyes. When Evan opened his eyes and looked in front of him, he saw the gloomy clouds of the second layer started to disappear and something else started to appear in front of his vision. At first, the scenery in front of him was quite vague as his vision was obstructed by a strange mist. But soon, the mist in the area disappeared and his vision cleared. The moment his vision cleared and Evan saw what was in front of him, his eyes opened wide in shock. What in the name of seven hells is this thing? The third layer of the tomb always stays bright with a sun shining in the clear sky 24/7. The sky of the second layer is always covered by gloomy black clouds, creating an eerie atmosphere. And as Biscuit moved forward and the mist obstructing Evan's vision cleared, the first layer of the tomb finally came into his sight and the view in front of him shocked him. Unlike the previous two layers, the sky of the first layer was filled with beautiful stars that were shining brightly like gems in the clear night sky. Looking at the beautiful night sky that was filled with millions of stars, Evan couldn't help but marvel at its beauty, but the thing that shocked him was not the beautiful scenery, but something completely different. What in the name of seven hells is that thing? Evan muttered in a shocked voice as he looked at the pillar of a half-black and half-golden light that pierced the sky in the far distance. Looking at the pillar of light that seemed as if it was going to a completely different world by piercing the sky, Evan's mouth became dry and his heart started to beat at a rapid speed. He did not know why, but for some reason, he was feeling a sense of familiarity from the pillar of light. He took a deep breath to calm down his beating heart and took out the map he found in Octavius' cave dimension. Looking at the map and estimating the location of the pillar of light, he confirmed that the pillar of light was located at the place that was marked on the map with the name of Core Altar. Octavius told me that this tomb was created to seal something. Evan thought aloud as he remembered what Octavius told him. Could it be that the thing or the person who is sealed here is inside that pillar of light? Evan looked at the pillar of light with narrowed eyes, but he knew that if he wanted to get the answers to his questions, he would have to go there himself. He took a deep breath and saw he was about to enter the first layer. With Biscuit's flying speed, it would take him less than 2 minutes to cross the second layer and enter the first layer. Unlike the second layer where most of the monsters ranged from beginner level rank 2 to peak of rank 2 and just a few beginner level rank 3, the first layer is more dangerous as the beginner level rank 3 monsters are quite common here and there are even mid-level and peak rank 3 monsters as well, Evan said in a serious voice and looked at a small white-colored triangular shape object in his hand. The small object in his hands was a soul beacon made from the souls of peak rank 2 core evolvers and monsters. After collecting the souls of the people he killed in the recent event and the souls of the monsters that he collected since he entered the tomb, he finally had enough souls to create this beacon. Using this soul beacon, he can teleport 60,000 kilometers away in an instant. Although the range of the spiritual senses of the peak rank 3 and some powerful mid-level rank 3 monsters can cover an area of more than 60,000 kilometers, this soul beacon was still the best thing for him to escape in case something happens. The only problem Evan had with this soul beacon was its consumption. In order to teleport 60,000 kilometers away, he would have to use all of his world essence along with some of his shadow energy. Although the consumption was a bit high, Evan didn't mind as it was worth it. freewebnovel.com. But still, if I had more world essence and I could create more than one soul beacon at a time, it would have been very easy for me to escape from any kind of danger, Evan said in a low voice and shook his head. Now that I am at the peak of rank 1, I need to create my domain, he said as he thought about the fire domain stone that evolved into the perfect level fire domain stone just a few days ago. Chap 704. Evan wanted to use the perfect domain stone and try to create his own domain, but in order to create his own domain, he needed to turn 25% of his world essence into the conceptual energy of void. He had already turned 24% of his world essence into conceptual energy of void and just needed to convert a little more of his world essence before he could start creating his domain. I have the low-level void crystal that I found inside the void. I can use it to increase my understanding of void energy to 25% instantly, but I have a feeling that this void crystal would be more useful in the future, so instead of wasting it here, I should save it for the time being, Evan said as he knew he just needed a few more days to reach the 25% mark, so there was no need for him to use void crystal here. Soon, the gloomy clouds that covered the sky disappeared and Evan finally entered the first layer. The moment he entered the first layer, a cold wind blew past him, making him shiver. Damn, what's wrong with the temperature here? Even with my 150 points of endurance, I am feeling as if I am sitting inside a pond of ice-cold water, Evan muttered, and a very faint layer of red fire from the prismatic fire covered him, making his body warm. After getting rid of the cold, Evan observed his surroundings and noticed just like how the gravity in the second layer was higher than the third layer, the gravity in the first layer was way higher than the second layer. Not only the monsters, even the environment of the first layer is far more dangerous than the second and third layer, Evan muttered and was about to ask Biscuit to land on the ground so that he could get used to the high gravity of the first layer before moving forward, but before he could say anything, he felt something and hurriedly ordered Biscuit to move aside. Biscuit followed Evan's order, and the moment it moved aside, swish! A beam of icy power that froze the space itself went past it. After missing Biscuit, the beam of icy power continued to move forward and soon struck a giant mountain that was thousands of meters high, freezing it entirely. Evan gulped down when he saw the power of the ice beam and looked in the direction from where the attack came, only to see a giant 20-meter-tall bear, covered in snow-white fur, glaring at him with its deep blue eyes. Evan came down from Biscuit's back once it landed and admired the beautiful lake that was illuminated by the light of the bright stars. As Evan looked around the lake, he suddenly noticed something at the other end of the lake. He raised an eyebrow when he noticed there was something on the other end of the lake, but he couldn't see it clearly as it was hidden because of the mist. Evan tried to see what it was using Eagle's Eye skill, and upon using the skill, he saw a small hut at the other end of the lake. Thank you at flame_bell for the magic castle. Dash 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 dash. A hut. Evan was baffled when he saw the thing that he noticed at the other end of the lake was actually a hut. Why is there a hut in this kind of place? Evan muttered with a frown on his face, as he could tell that whoever created this hut made it with a lot of care, as if they wanted to live in this hut for a long time. Normally, it would not have been weird to see a hut in a beautiful place like this. The tranquil lake, filled with flowers and plants, without the presence of any monsters, was an ideal place for anyone to settle down who wanted to live with nature. But the problem was that this place was inside the tomb of Ancient. So ideally speaking, there shouldn't be a hut like this here, because other than monsters, no one lives inside the tomb. Could it be that this hut was created by someone who entered the tomb when it opened last time 10 years ago? Evan said while looking at the small hut that was illuminated by the starlight, and after thinking for a while, decided to take a look at it. Biscuit had already scanned the area and the lake using its spiritual senses and confirmed that there was not any monster in their surroundings, so Evan was not worried about them. Biscuit, I will be back in a while, Evan said to the black bird who was lying lazily on the ground, and flew towards the other end of the lake. Biscuit didn't bother to open its eyes and just nodded its head when it heard Evan. The lake wasn't big, so in just a few seconds, Evan arrived at the other end of the lake. Upon arriving at the other end of the lake, he was even more surprised because the grass, flowers and plants around the hut were neatly cut and organized as if someone was taking care of them on a daily basis. Seeing this unnatural situation, Evan's awareness shot through the roof and he looked at everything carefully. Does anyone live here? Evan thought inwardly and looked at the small hut in front of him with a cautious look on his face. He thought for a second, and instead of checking the hut by himself, he summoned one of his shadow undeads and sent it to open the wooden door of the hut. Soon, the shadow undead stopped in front of the wooden hut and pushed its door lightly. But to Evan's surprise, the shadow undead couldn't open the door. Use your full strength, Evan said to Shadow Undead when he saw it wasn't able to open the door. But to his absolute shock, even after using its full strength, the Shadow Undead wasn't able to open the door. The rank of the Shadow Undead whom he sent to open the door was at the beginner level rank 2. A beginner level rank 2 Shadow Undead can even destroy a mountain if he uses its full strength, but the same Shadow Undead can't open the seemingly normal-looking wooden door even after using his full strength. What kind of sick wooden door is this? Evan muttered with a speechless look on his face and after hesitating for a moment, walked towards the door himself. He asked the Shadow Undead to back away and touched the door with one of his hands to push it open. He was ready to use his full power, but… clank! The moment he touched the door, a clanking sound rang out and the wooden door was unlocked. Evan looked at the wooden door with a blank look on his face and pushed it lightly. As he pushed it lightly, the door slowly started to open. Is there a fingerprint lock on this door? Evan thought with a twitching mouth, feeling something was wrong with this hut. His Shadow Undead used all of his strength but the door didn't even budge, yet it opened the moment he touched it. Don't tell me this hut is also somehow related to that guy. Evan said in a low voice as the wooden door was fully opened. As the door opened, a plain-looking small room came into Evan's sight. Inside the hut, other than a small straw bed, he did not see anything. Evan used his spiritual senses to look inside the hut, but even then, he didn't find anything unusual inside it. He ordered his Shadow Undead, whom he had summoned earlier to enter the hut, but when the Shadow Undead tried to enter the hut, a barrier appeared in front of it, preventing the Shadow Undead from entering. Evan raised an eyebrow when he saw the barrier and tried to touch it with his hand, but instead of touching the barrier, his hands passed through it as if the barrier didn't exist. Am I the only one who can enter? Evan muttered with a confused look when he saw his hands easily pass through the barrier. Looking at the small hut, he didn't feel any danger and even his instincts were completely calm. Although he knew the hut was really strange, something inside him was telling him to move forward, and that's exactly what he did. As he took a step forward and passed through the barrier, Evan felt his surroundings wrap and twist and the moment his feet touched the wooden floor of the hut, his mind went blank for a split second. When he regained his senses, he saw instead of the hut, he was standing inside a small, messy-looking room. Evan looked around him and for some reason, he felt the messy-looking room looked quite familiar. As he looked around and saw a single bed, with a lot of books and games scattered all around, Evan's eyes widened in shock and he finally remembered why this place looked familiar. Isn't this my room when I was on Earth? Evan looked at the small messy room with a shocked expression on his face. Oh, how is this possible? He muttered and tried to use his eyes of abyss, thinking he was in an illusion. But to his shock, when he tried to use the eyes of abyss skill, he realized he couldn't use it. No, it was correct to say he couldn't use any of his skills. There is no world essence inside my body, and why do I feel so weak? Evan quickly walked towards the mirror that was in the corner of the room, kicking some of the video games and novels that were scattered on the floor in the process. As soon as Evan arrived in front of the mirror and looked at his appearance, he sucked in a breath of cold air and his eyes opened wide. He breathed heavily as he looked at the average-looking black-haired, black-eyed guy in the mirror with his eyes wide open. This is me when I was on Earth. Evan touched the mirror and the floor of the room to confirm whether he was in an illusion or not, but when he touched them, everything felt real. What is going on? Did I come back to the past? Evan tried to stay calm and analyze his situation, but the more he looked at the room where he used to live, the more chaotic his thoughts became. He looked around the room and soon walked towards the study desk where his old-looking smartphone was. He picked up his smartphone and looked at the date. The 29th of February 2020. Looking at the date, his eyes once again opened wide. Isn't it just a day before I died? Evan cursed loudly because he still remembered he had to go for an interview on the 1st of March 2020 and he received his transmigration ticket that day. Just what the hell is going on here? He tried to communicate with his Shadow Undeads using shadow senses but found it was also useless. Currently, he was just a normal human without any powers and he couldn't do anything. Knock knock. Just when Evan was thinking about his messy situation, he heard the sound of door knocking. Hearing the knocking sound, his expression quickly returned to normal and he raised an eyebrow. Who could it be? He muttered with a wary look on his face because even though it had been a while, he still clearly remembered that the number of times someone visited him in his apartment during the time he lived on Earth could be counted on a single hand. He looked around his room and soon found a steel pipe. Maybe it was because of not being able to use his powers that he was a little paranoid, but his instincts were telling him that the person who was knocking on the door wasn't normal. He picked up the steel pipe, that he still remembers he brought home, stole from a construction site. By the way, I don't remember why I stole, why I brought this pipe home. Evan thought with a strange look on his face as he walked towards the door while holding the steel pipe in his hands. Knock knock. He took a deep breath after stopping in front of the door and slowly opened it. He tried to look at the person who was outside through the little gap, but upon seeing the individual, his eyes opened wide. Wah! Evan wanted to close the door after seeing who, or rather what, was outside, but suddenly, he lost control of his body. Even though he didn't want to open the door, his body moved on its own and fully opened it. As the door swung wide, something resembling a mass of black smoke with two arms appeared in front of him. Evan wanted to use the steel pipe he was holding to strike the strange entity, but his body still wasn't under his control. "You're here." Suddenly, Evan's mouth opened on its own and he stepped aside, allowing the strange figure to enter the room. What the fuck is going on? Evan tried to move his body, but he could only watch as his body moved on its own and even allowed the strange figure to enter his room. In his current situation, he felt as if he had become a mere spectator and his body was acting on its own. "Is it time?" Evan asked once the strange figure entered his room. "Yes, I will start tomorrow." When Evan, who was hearing the conversation between the strange figure and his body, heard the voice of the black figure, he felt as if someone struck him with a hammer. Isn't this the same voice I heard inside the Shadow Kingdom dungeon when someone asked me what I wanted to sacrifice? Evan thought with a shocked look on his face, remembering his conversation with the spirit of the Tower of Ascension. The spirit of the Tower of Ascension told me that this voice belongs to the will of the world. Then does it mean the thing in front of me is the will of the earth? Chap 683. Tomorrow, huh? Evan's body nodded its head upon hearing the black figure and didn't say anything else. The black figure also didn't say anything and started to fade away. In less than a second, the figure disappeared from the room and Evan regained control over his body. Wow, what the fuck was that? Evan muttered while panting heavily and his body drenched in cold sweat. "I will start tomorrow." Suddenly, the words spoken by the figure echo in his mind and he remembers that tomorrow is the day when he will meet with an accident and die. Just what is going on here? Evan muttered while grabbing his head. Did I come back to the past? If yes, then who was that strange black figure? I don't remember meeting him a day before my accident. Evan's mind was a complete mess, and he did not know what was going on. Just when he was trying to figure out his situation, a small magic circle appeared beneath his feet and he disappeared from the room. The small, wooden hut Evan entered was surrounded by a transparent-looking golden-colored barrier. Boom! Suddenly, a small black-colored fireball struck the golden-colored barrier, creating a massive explosion that destroyed all the plants and trees in the surroundings. But even after being struck by the fireball, the golden-colored barrier didn't even budge. On top of that, as if the surroundings of the wooden hut were being rewound in time, all the damage caused by the fireball slowly disappeared and everything returned to its previous state. The plants that were burned to ashes grew back and the trees that were destroyed returned to normal. Screech! Biscuit screeched in frustration when it saw this and tried to break the golden-colored barrier again. Unfortunately, all of its attacks were useless against the barrier and even the damage caused by its skills disappeared without leaving behind any traces. The reason the bird was attacking the barrier was that a few seconds ago, it suddenly felt its connection with Evan, which it formed after giving its soul essence to him, became extremely feeble. Thinking that Evan might have encountered danger, it immediately came here to help him, but instead of finding Evan in a dangerous situation, it found this barrier covering the wooden hut. From outside the transparent barrier, Biscuit could see Evan lying on the straw bed inside the hut, and the entire straw bed was glowing in a deep blue light, releasing strange energy fluctuations that not only disturbed the space inside the hut but also seemed to disrupt the flow of time. Looking at him lying on the bed, Biscuit felt as if Evan's soul had left his body and it was just looking at a dead body. But it knew that Evan wasn't dead because it could still feel the feeble connection with him, which is why it was trying to break the barrier. Unfortunately, the barrier was just too powerful, and its attacks were useless. Just when Biscuit was thinking about what should it do to break the barrier, it felt something and looked behind, only to see someone standing there. "What is this place?" Evan asked himself with a look of confusion on his face as he found himself standing in a place that seemed like a hospital corridor. Just a second ago, he was in his apartment, but he suddenly found himself here. He walked towards the glass door not far away from him and noticed his appearance was still the same as it was on Earth. Suddenly, just like before, he once again lost control over his body and he started to move on his own. He walked to the end of the corridor where a room was located, and like a ghost, his body passed through the closed door of the room without opening it. What the hell? Evan was stunned when he passed through the door like a ghost and felt strange because he couldn't feel any kind of power inside him. Upon passing through the door, Evan saw two people inside the room. One man and one woman. The woman was lying on the bed with a tired look, while the man was holding a newborn baby in his hands. Although the woman looked tired, she was looking at the newborn kid with a gentle and love-filled gaze. The man was also speaking something, but for some reason, Evan couldn't hear their voices. His body was still not under his control, so even if he wanted to, he couldn't do anything. After looking at the couple for a while, his body moved closer to the man and his gaze landed on the baby's face. Evan didn't know why, but upon looking at the baby, he felt the baby was somewhat familiar. "Don't tell me." Suddenly, something clicked inside his mind and even though he couldn't control his body, his eyes still widened in shock. "Don't tell me the baby this man is holding is me." Evan looked at the baby carefully and shook his head. "No way, right? There is no way I was a baby at some point. I am sure I was grown up from the moment I was born." Evan wanted to deny that the cute little bundle the man was holding wasn't him as he couldn't imagine himself wearing diapers. But the more he looked at the baby, the more certain he became that this little guy was him. "Wait a second. Since this baby is me, then does it mean the man and the woman in front of me are my parents?" Evan suddenly thought and looked at the man and woman. As far as he could remember, on Earth, he grew up in an orphanage and never saw his parents. He only knew that a few days after his birth, both of them died in an accident. Looking at the man and woman who were happily talking, Evan didn't know what he should feel. Evan also realized that just like how he couldn't hear what they were talking about, the couple also couldn't see him even though he was standing just beside the man. Just when Evan was wondering why he was in this place, he suddenly noticed the couple stopped talking. No, instead of stopped talking, it was more accurate to say that both of them froze as if time around them stopped. What's going on? Evan thought inwardly and tried to look around to see what was happening, but he still couldn't control his body so he was helpless. Suddenly, he saw the same black figure he saw earlier in his room appear beside the man who was holding the baby. Surprisingly, even though the couple froze, the baby could still move its face and even when it saw the strange black figure, it didn't show any kind of reaction. The black figure didn't speak anything after appearing there and pointed one of its fingers towards the baby, sending a strange energy inside him. The moment the energy went inside the baby's body, a magic circle appeared on his chest where his heart was located and he lost consciousness. "What the heck you are doing, you bastard?" Evan was shocked when he saw this and wanted to know what this guy just did, but before he could do anything, the surroundings around him turned dark. As expected, he is useless. You were right. In the darkness, Evan heard the voice of a man followed by a woman. He didn't know why, but when he heard these two voices, his expression twisted in anger and his face turned extremely scary, as if he wanted to kill someone. Slowly, he moved his head in the direction of the voices and the dark space around him started to light up. As he turned his head, two figures, whose appearances he couldn't see properly came into his view. But Evan didn't care about the two figures whose appearances he couldn't see and his eyes stopped on a small figure who was lying on the ground. The small figure was also a baby, just like the one he had seen a few seconds ago, but unlike the previous baby, this baby had sharp elf-like ears and an aura of demons around him. As Evan turned his head and his eyes landed on the baby lying on the ground, a shocked look appeared on his face. Seeing the pointed elf-like ears and the demonic aura around the baby's body, Evan immediately recognized what it was. He is an Eltern. Although the demonic aura around the baby was very feeble, he was absolutely sure that the little guy was an Eltern just like him. Could it be? Evan gulped as a certain possibility came to mind. His gaze shifted towards the two figures standing near the baby, and upon seeing them, for some reason, he felt a deep hatred and anger towards them from the depths of his soul. Who are these two people? Evan muttered with a frown on his face as he could not see their figures clearly. It was as if their figures were hidden behind a veil of mist, and no matter how hard he tried to look at them, he could not see anything. What should we do with him? One of the figures, who was male, spoke in a rather indifferent voice. From the looks of it, he can live for 3 days at best. So even if we don't do anything, he will eventually die on his own. The second figure, a woman, spoke without any emotion in her voice. Don't you want to save him? The man asked in a voice full of interest. There is no point in saving him. If we want to save him, we will have to destroy his core and seal his powers, and if we do so, he will become completely useless for us. The woman said in a cold voice. Upon hearing the conversation between the two, Evan didn't know why, but a smile filled with disdain appeared on his face on its own. Idiots. He spoke and looked at the baby, whose complexion was rather pale and looked as if he was sick. Evan tried to walk towards the baby and found that at some point, he regained control over his body, so he did not hesitate and quickly approached the baby. While walking towards him, Evan noticed his body changed once again and he was now in his Eltern form. However, he still couldn't feel any trace of power inside his body. When Evan stopped near the baby, the two figures didn't seem to realize he was there, but to his surprise, the little bundle lying on the ground turned his head towards him and looked at him with his one golden and one red eye shining like gems. Beautiful. For a moment, Evan was mesmerized by the beauty of those eyes, and just for a split second, his eyes also changed color, turning red and golden. Your control over the gaze of Monarch increased greatly. The requirement for using the gaze of Monarch has been reduced. Suddenly, 2 notifications flashed before Evan's eyes, making him surprised. But he ignored them for the time being and carefully looked at the baby. Just from a single look, he could tell that the baby's condition wasn't good and there seemed to be 2 different kinds of energies running rampant inside his body. The 2 energies were slowly destroying his body from inside and there was a very uncomfortable look on the baby's face as if he was struggling, but even then, the little kiddo didn't cry. Honestly, Evan felt a bit uncomfortable when he saw the look on the baby's face. He could tell that the baby was in great pain but was trying his best not to cry. It was very strange for him to see a newborn baby act like this, but when he thought about the possible identity of the kid, he just shook his head and sighed. Suddenly, the scenery around Evan once again changed and he found himself standing in the middle of what seemed like a dumping ground. But instead of garbage and waste, what he saw inside the dumping ground were rotting dead bodies of different kinds of people. There were bodies of monsters, demons, elves, orcs and many others. Evan looked at the rotting corpses with a look of disgust on his face as even though he had killed thousands of people, it was the first time he had seen a scene like this. Grr, grr, grr. Suddenly, he heard the growling of the monsters. Hearing the sound of monsters, he quickly looked back and saw some monsters that looked like a mixture of lizards and crocodiles looking at a newborn baby who was lying in the middle of the rotten corpses. The monsters were deep brown in color and their skin was stained with the blood of rotten corpses. When the monsters looked at the baby, whose flesh was completely fresh, their eyes glowed with an eerie light. Evan immediately recognized the baby, who had a presence similar to that of Eltern. He wanted to help him when he saw he was surrounded by the monsters, but when he tried to move towards him, he realized he had once again lost control over his body and couldn't move. Fu-K. Evan cursed inwardly when he saw one of the monsters suddenly jump towards the baby. The monster opened its maw wide and was about to swallow the baby when suddenly, whoosh, a green vine came out of the ground and caught the monster, dragging it away from the baby. At the same time, whoosh, 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 thousands of sharp wooden thorns appeared above the other monsters and before they could do anything, their bodies turned into mincemeat by the restless assault of the sharp wooden thorns. Evan turned his head sideways, in the direction from where he felt the energy waves coming earlier. When he turned in the direction of the energy waves, he saw someone standing there, and upon seeing this person, his eyes opened wide in shock. What is this guy doing here? Screech. Outside of the hut, Biscuit screeched warily and looked at the small figure of a girl who suddenly appeared behind it. Although Biscuit was a beginner-level rank 3 monster, it didn't even feel the presence of the small figure until she stood behind it. The girl had waist-length red hair, emerald green eyes and a petite build. She was just 100 centimeters tall and was wearing a full-sleeved baggy-looking black-colored dress. Screech. Seeing the little girl staring at Evan, who was sleeping on the straw bed inside the hut, Biscuit screeched and looked at the girl as if warning her not to do anything foolish. Hearing Biscuit screech, the little girl looked at it and tilted her head in a cute manner as if she did not understand why this dumb black bird was screaming. Seeing the way the little girl was looking at it, Biscuit's eyes turned cold and it felt insulted because it could tell that the little girl was thinking that it was dumb. Doesn't this foolish girl know who I am? freewebnovel.com. It was Biscuit. Although its name was rather shabby, it was still a rank 3 monster. It was one of the overlords of the second layer of the Tomb of the Ancient. It was a ruler who had thousands of monsters under its command, so how could it tolerate when a little girl who looked not older than 10 years was looking at it as if it was dumb? Screech. Biscuit screeched loudly and spread its giant wings. Black flames burst forth, covering its entire body, and a majestic crown made of deep black flames appeared on its head. The aura around Biscuit completely changed and it looked at the little girl with a proud and haughty look on its face as if asking her to worship it. Seeing the change in the appearance of the dumb bird, the little girl's mouth opened in an O shape and she walked towards it with slow steps. Although Biscuit wasn't able to figure out how the little girl appeared behind it earlier without alerting it, the black bird didn't feel any malice or danger from her, so it allowed her to approach it. Soon the little girl stopped just a meter away from Biscuit. Biscuit was thinking that the little girl would show an awe-filled look upon seeing its majestic figure from up close and worship it. But all of its hopes were shattered when it saw drool trickling down from the corner of the girl's mouth and she was looking at it with anticipation as if waiting for something. Seeing the drool and the look of anticipation on the little girl's face, Biscuit's eyes widened in shock. Don't tell me this dumb girl is thinking about eating me. Biscuit thought and suddenly took a step backwards. The little girl didn't care about Biscuit's reaction and looked at the black flame that covered the bird, hoping that the powerful flame would soon cook this bird, and she would have a big feast today. Just thinking about eating the tender meat of the giant bird, the little girl's mouth watered and drool started to flow out of her mouth like a waterfall. Biscuit was speechless when it saw what was happening and felt like burning the insolent girl to a crisp. But the moment this thought came into its mind, for some reason, all of its instincts started to scream and warned it not to mess with the dumb-looking cute little girl who was waiting for it to be fully cooked by its own flame. Biscuit thought about deactivating the flame that covered its body so that the little girl would stop looking at it like it was a baked chicken, but when it looked at the anticipation-filled look of the little girl, Biscuit felt as if it was scum who was about to shatter a little girl's dream. The girl was waiting for the black flames to fully cook it, but if it deactivated its flames, wouldn't this girl feel devastated that her dream of eating a baked bird was shattered by it? For a moment, Biscuit even thought about allowing its flames to hurt itself so that it would be cooked and become a baked chicken for the little girl, but as soon as this thought appeared inside its mind, Biscuit shook its head and looked at the little girl warily, wondering what kind of evil sorcery this girl was using on it. It was Biscuit. It was a monster, and as a monster, it shouldn't feel any sympathy towards this little girl even though she was very cute. She must be using some kind of evil technique to make me sympathetic towards her. Biscuit thought and stopped using its black flames. The moment it stopped using the black flame, it heard a cute cry and saw the little girl looking at it with a shocked look on her face. Tink. Suddenly, Biscuit heard the sound of something dropping to the ground and when it looked carefully, it saw the little girl had dropped her fork on the ground. Seeing this evil little girl even brought a fork from God knows where, cold sweat appeared on Biscuit's forehead and it looked at the girl as if it was looking at a very dangerous opponent. But the girl didn't care about the way the black bird was looking at her, and seeing the flames that were cooking the bird disappear, small drops of tears started to gather at the corner of her eyes. Biscuit started to sweat even more profusely when it saw this, and even though it was a monster, it still felt like it was a scumbag. For a second, the thought of cooking itself once again came to the bird's mind, but it quickly shook its head and looked at the girl warily, thinking she was definitely using some kind of evil technique on it. Just when Biscuit was trying to figure out what kind of evil technique the girl was using while doing its best not to cook itself. Boom! A sudden explosion startled it. Biscuit quickly looked in the direction of the explosion and saw, for some reason, the wooden hut had exploded. It was about to rush towards the hut to see if Evan was fine or not, but before it could rush forward, "Father!" It heard the panicked voice of the little girl and saw her running towards the destroyed wooden hut. Boom! "Father!" Hearing the sound of the explosion, the little girl shouted in a panicked voice and dashed towards the destroyed hut. Biscuit also wanted to check out what happened, but when it heard what the little devil shouted, its mind went blank. "Father! She is calling that demon father!" Biscuit started to sweat and gulped down its saliva. Does it mean she is his daughter? It thought with a look of horror on its face and sighed in relief that it didn't burn this insolent girl to a crisp when she wanted to eat it. If she is really his daughter and I accidentally burnt her. Biscuit's entire body shuddered and it thought about the massacre that happened a few days ago. It was sure that if she is really his daughter and it had burnt her, it would have become part of the dead bodies that were lying inside his shadow storage. Biscuit thought about all this in less than a second and it wanted to follow after the little girl to make sure nothing happened to her, but just when it was about to follow her, freewebnovel.com. Swish! A powerful pressure, that shook Biscuit's entire existence descended over the area. The black bird was pressed to the ground due to the heavy pressure and a look of horror appeared on its face. Using all of its strength, it lifted its head and looked towards the little girl. The little girl was standing near the place where the hut used to be with a panicked look on her face, and a blackish-red aura was coming out of her body. What is this heavy aura she is releasing? Biscuit thought inwardly as it tried to stand up, but no matter how hard it tried, it couldn't stand up under the heavy aura that was coming out of the little girl. Because of the explosion, the hut was completely destroyed, leaving behind a 100-meter wide and 20-meter deep crater that was filled with fire. The little girl was looking at the fiery pit with a panicked look as if trying to look for someone, but when she didn't see anything inside the fiery pit, the panicked look on her face increased even more and the intensity of the aura coming out of her body almost doubled. Rumble. Suddenly, a loud rumbling sound echoed throughout the first layer of the tomb and the half-golden and half-black pillar of light that was in the middle of the first layer started to shake. At the same time, a blackish-red pressure started to come out of the pillar of light as well. The pressure that came out of the pillar of light was thousands of times more powerful than the little girl and engulfed the entire first layer, which was even bigger than the dark forest itself. Even though the entire first layer went into chaos due to the anomaly, the little girl didn't care about it and continued to look at the fire pit as if she were looking for someone. Suddenly, the little girl remembered the dumb black bird and thought about asking it to help her extinguish the fire. But when she turned around and looked back at the bird, she saw it lying on the ground with a look of fear on its face. The little girl was confused when she saw this, as she couldn't understand why the bird was looking at her with fear, but the confusion on her face soon disappeared, replaced by a look of hesitation. When Biscuit saw the look of hesitation on the little girl's face, it thought she was worried about it and was considering whether to stop releasing her aura or not. Thinking that the little girl was worried about it, Biscuit almost teared up and thought about cooking one of its legs for her. While Biscuit was feeling happy, the little girl's mind was in a complete mess. Should I save Father by extinguishing the fire, or should I let it burn and throw this dumb, helpless bird into the fire pit to cook it? The little girl was torn between her priorities and didn't know what to choose. What should I do? The little girl held her head and sat down on the ground in a depressed manner. She wanted to save her father, but at the same time, she wanted to eat the dumb bird. Such a difficult choice. Father or the dumb bird? What should she choose? As the little girl's depression increased, the heavy aura coming out of her body also grew. As her aura increased, the pillar of light started to shake even more, as if it would shatter at any moment. Biscuit, who was thinking that the little girl was worried about it, was dumbfounded when the heavy aura that was coming out of the little girl increased even more. It thought she was worried about it and was planning to retract her aura, but looking at how the blackish-red aura coming out of her body increased even more, it started to doubt if it had misunderstood her. Is she not worried about me? Biscuit thought, but it soon shook its head. There is no way she is not worried about me. I am Biscuit. I am such a beautiful bird. It is impossible for people to not worry about me. Although the reality was in front of it, Biscuit didn't want to believe it. It was in denial. While Biscuit was comforting itself, the little girl was also trying to clear her mind. Just when she was about to make her decision, the little girl felt something and looked behind her. When she looked behind, her deep emerald green eyes met with the black eyes of a person who was standing some distance away from her, and her mind went blank. But the blank state of her mind didn't last long because soon, a joyful look appeared on her face. The little girl stood up from the ground and started to run towards the black-eyed person. Father. Evan slowly opened his eyes and found himself lying in the middle of a giant crater, surrounded by a sea of fire. Although he was surrounded by flames, he felt completely fine and wasn't affected by the heat. He looked at himself and saw his body covered in the blue fire of the prismatic fire, protecting him from the high temperature of the fire. It seems the prismatic fire activated on its own, thinking I was in danger. Evan thought inwardly, feeling the prismatic fire might have a consciousness of its own. Although he wanted to confirm his guess about the prismatic fire, he decided to put it back in his mind for the time being and stood up. freewebnovel.com. Upon standing up, he noticed he was lying on a burnt straw bed. This straw bed. Isn't this the bed I saw inside the hut before I entered? Evan muttered in a low voice. Don't tell me everything that happened with me was because of this bed. Evan touched the bed with his hands to see if there was anything special about it, but when he touched it, the burnt straw bed turned into ashes and crumbled completely. Evan was speechless when he saw the bed turned into ashes, but suddenly, his eyes landed on a magic circle that was drawn under the straw bed. The magic circle was also destroyed and only a few of its parts remained intact. Evan could feel very faint energy waves coming out from the remaining parts of the magic circle, and if his guess was correct, then the reason behind the giant crater and the fire was the destruction of this magic circle. If I am not wrong, then everything that happened with me earlier is related to this magic circle. Evan muttered with a conflicted look on his face, as he remembered the things that he saw earlier. Now I understand why my bloodlust skill evolved into Reaper's Wrath skill at that time. He thought and sighed heavily. He looked around him and seeing the fiery pit, he was now certain about the person who created this hut. Damn, I feel like I just watched a horror movie with a very shitty ending. Evan thought to himself as he rubbed his eyebrows. That black figure, he said in a low voice as he thought about the black figure whom he saw in his apartment in the hospital, and his eyes gleamed with dangerous light. That figure must be somehow related to the will of the world. The spirit of the Tower of Ascension told me to go to the forbidden land of Utopia if I want to connect with the will of the world. Evan muttered as he clenched his fist tightly. Because of what happened earlier, now he understands many things that were mysteries to him before, but at the same time, he found many other new things that were giving him a headache. For example, now he was sure that his death on Earth and the transmigration to Aurora World weren't a coincidence and were related to the black figure whom he had seen earlier. He also knew that the black figure did something to him when he was born on Earth, but the question was, what did he do at that time? He just saw him using a skill or something similar on him in the hospital, and a magic circle appeared on his chest at that time. Evan touched his chest, but for now, there was only the rune of evolution on his chest, nothing else. Just when Evan was thinking about the things that he saw, especially the things that he saw in the very end. Rumble. The entire fire pit started to shake. Evan raised an eyebrow when he felt the tremors and thought a monster was coming towards his location. But this thought soon disappeared when from the blazing pit, he saw the half-golden and half-black pillar of light that pierced the sky was shaking. At the same time, when the powerful blackish-red aura came out of the pillar of light, Evan didn't know why, but he felt a sense of familiarity with it. It was as if the aura coming out from the pillar was part of him. Because of this sense of familiarity, even though the aura was very heavy, Evan didn't feel uncomfortable. On the contrary, his soul felt very refreshed, as if it finally met with something that had been missing for a long time. What is this strange feeling? Evan raised an eyebrow and was about to jump out of the fiery pit, but just when he was about to jump out, he suddenly felt a similar aura that was coming out from the pillar of light from the outside of the pit. Feeling another source of the familiar aura, Evan stopped for a moment, and even though he was feeling familiarity with it, he still increased his vigilance. He created a small ball of the red fire using the prismatic fire, and after confirming its power, he jumped outside. The moment he jumped outside, the first thing that came into his sight was Biscuit, who couldn't endure the heavy aura and was pressed to the ground. Evan's expression turned serious upon seeing Biscuit's condition, and he quickly looked towards the source of the heavy aura, but when his eyes landed on the source of the heavy aura, his mouth opened wide in shock. What is a little girl doing here? Evan thought with a baffled look on his face as he saw a little girl crouching on the ground while holding her head as if she was troubled by something. Suddenly, the little girl seemed to sense his gaze and looked in his direction. The moment his eyes met with the emerald green eyes of the little girl, for some reason, his heart started to beat faster. He was about to open his mouth to ask who she was, but before he could say anything, the little girl started to run towards him with a joyful look on her face and shouted something that nearly gave him a heart attack. "Father!" After emerging from the fire pit, Evan was momentarily stunned when he saw the little girl because she looked just like a normal person. If not for the heavy aura emanating from her body, he might have mistaken her for an ordinary human child who somehow entered the first layer of the tomb. Although she appeared to be a normal little girl and her heavy aura wasn't affecting him, Evan was still ready to blast her using the red fireball if he noticed anything suspicious. When their eyes met and she suddenly started to run towards him, Evan almost shot the red fireball at her, but "Father!" When he heard what the little girl called him, puff, the red fireball he was holding disappeared into a puff of smoke and his mind went blank. The little girl excitedly ran towards him and jumped at him. Because of what the little girl called him, Evan didn't even notice when she jumped towards him. Only when the girl attached herself to him like a koala did he come back to his senses and look down. He. Upon looking down, he saw the girl was smiling stupidly while rubbing her cheeks on his chest. Wow, what is this cute creature? Evan wanted to pull away from the little girl, but when he saw her smiling and acting like a cat, he felt as if his heart was struck by an invisible arrow. Slowly, the blackish-red aura emanating from the little girl started to decrease, and in just a few seconds, she returned to normal. Even the pillar of the half-golden and half-black light located in the middle of the first layer stopped shaking, and the first layer of the tomb finally returned to its previous calm state. Evan raised an eyebrow when he saw this because, without the heavy aura, the little girl really looked like a normal person. There was no hint of world essence or conceptual energy inside her, and even her body looked very weak, just like a normal 10-year-old kid. "Father, I miss you," Evan snapped out of his thoughts upon hearing the little girl's voice and noticed she was looking at him with tear-filled eyes. Seeing her tear-filled eyes, he didn't know what to say. He felt if he said something like, "Who are you?" or, "Do I know you?" something bad would happen. Moreover, for some reason, he felt a deep connection with her and didn't want to hurt her. Seeing her expectant eyes, he sighed inwardly and shook his head. "Let's go with the flow for now, and I will slowly ask for more information after making her more comfortable," Evan thought, and decided to act as if he were really her father. "I also miss you," he said while patting her head. Evan was actually a little surprised when he spoke those words because they came out naturally as if he really wanted to say that. Hearing Evan, the little girl looked at him with a blank expression on her face. Seeing her expression, Evan felt uncomfortable and thought she had realized he was lying to her. What? Although he was sweating inwardly, thinking that she knew he was lying to her, he still asked in a calm voice. "If you miss me, then why didn't you come to meet me for so many days?" The little girl asked with tear-filled eyes. When Evan heard her, for some reason, he felt a great sense of guilt and wasn't able to utter anything. I looked for you everywhere, but I couldn't find you. I thought you left me and went somewhere," the little girl said in a choked voice and started to cry. "I was very lonely. I wanted to meet you, but I wasn't able to find you anywhere." The pillar of light in the center of the first layer once again started to shake, and the tremors generated by it were far stronger than before. Although the entire first layer was shaking because of the anomaly of the pillar, Evan didn't care about it and looked at the little girl who was crying in his arms. "What is this feeling?" he thought, feeling as if someone was crushing his heart when he saw her crying. But seeing the way she was crying, he stopped thinking about everything and said the words that came to his mind. "I am sorry." Hearing Evan, the girl started to cry even louder. Her cry was filled with loneliness as if she was trying to vent out all of her emotions. Evan closed his eyes when he heard her crying getting louder and tried his best to remain calm. "I am sorry for not coming to see you earlier, but I promise I won't leave you alone anymore," he said in a gentle voice while patting her back. Hearing him, the little girl lifted her head and looked at him with her crystal-like green eyes. "Really?" Seeing her hopeful eyes, Evan nodded his head and wiped away her tears with his fingers. "Really, now even if you want, I won't let you live here alone." "I also don't want to live here," the little girl said and hugged him tighter. As her emotions calmed down, the pillar of light that was shaking heavily also returned to normal once again. Evan looked towards the pillar and the little girl in his arms with a thoughtful look on his face. It was impossible for him not to see the connection between the pillar of light and the little girl, but he didn't care about it for now. After a few minutes, the little girl finally calmed down, but she still clung to him like a koala. Seeing the little girl was finally not crying, Evan sighed in relief and smiled a little. He walked towards Biscuit, who finally stood up from the ground after the heavy aura coming out of the girl disappeared, and sat down on the ground some distance away from it. After sitting down, he looked at the girl and after a moment, opened his mouth. "Can I ask you something?" "Just look down." Evan shook his head when he saw this and said while patting her head, "Don't worry about the monsters, they won't be able to hurt me." "Really?" Alara asked while raising her head. "Really?" Evan nodded his head with a confident smile on his face. Alara sighed in relief when she heard Evan and a smile appeared on his face as well. Evan was about to continue his conversation with Alara, but he suddenly felt Biscuit's presence. He lifted his head and looked towards the sky, but upon looking at the sky, he was completely speechless. "This stupid bird." Evan sat on the ground, looking at the campfire in front of him with a speechless look on his face. Beside the campfire, Biscuit stood on its two thin stick-like legs and was roasting a big chunk of meat with a serious look on its bird-like face. From time to time, it changed the position of the meat using its wings to cook it from all directions and looked at Evan, or more specifically, at the little girl who was sitting on his lap with a flattering smile on its face. "Look, I am cooking delicious meat of a peak rank 2 monster for you, so forget about eating me, okay?" This is what its expressions were saying when it looked at the little girl from time to time. Evan's mouth couldn't help but twitch uncontrollably when he saw this scene and he didn't know what to say. Seeing a rank 3 monster act like a meek chicken and cooking for a little girl with a scared look on its face was really a strange scene. "I hope it won't act like a coward while facing other monsters." Evan sighed inwardly and looked towards the pillar of light. Because of its powerful flames, it took Biscuit only a few minutes to cook the meat of a peak rank 2 monster to perfection. Once the meat was cooked, it immediately brought it in front of the little devil, whose mouth had already turned into a waterfall. Evan looked at the perfectly cooked golden brown piece of meat in front of him with a neutral look on his face. Although the meat looked delicious and its smell was very nice, he still didn't feel like eating it. After seeing that event, I feel like I lost my appetite for food. Evan thought with a complicated look on his face as he remembered a few things that he saw earlier. After leaving the tomb, I will go to the Demon Empire to see if they are still alive, and if they are still alive, he said to himself, and for a moment, his eyes turned completely ice cold as if he was under the effect of the Cursed One title. Father. Although Alora's mouth turned into a waterfall because of the delicious smell of the food, she still looked at him as if asking for his permission. Hearing Alora, Evan stopped thinking about other things and nodded his head. "Go on, your Uncle Biscuit cooked it for you with a lot of love. Don't forget to thank him for the food." "Uncle Biscuit." Hearing him, Alora looked at him in confusion. Evan nodded his head and explained. "This bird here is your Uncle Biscuit. He is Father's companion, so don't think about eating him, alright?" Evan didn't know how old Alora was, but he could tell that her mind wasn't developed enough. She might be thousands of years old, and her body may look like a 10-year-old kid, but her mind was similar to that of a 4 or 5-year-old kid. From her earlier look, he could tell that she was looking at Biscuit as if it was food. It wasn't a big deal for now, but it could turn into a big problem in the future. What if in the future she encountered a high-level monster and instead of running away from it, she thought it was food and decided to bite or cook it, even though she was weaker than it? He wanted to change her mentality, so he decided to start by changing her behavior towards Biscuit, who was flattering her as if his life depended on it. Oh. Elora nodded her head, hearing Evan, and looked at Biscuit. Thank you, Uncle Biscuit. She thanked the black bird as Evan told her, then took a bite of meat cooked by it. On the other hand, Biscuit was stunned to hear Evan. If someone looked closely, they would see black veins appearing on its forehead. Uncle. Who are you calling uncle, you bastard? Can't you see I am a female? I am auntie, not uncle. Biscuit was beyond angry being called uncle by Evan and wanted to burn him in her black flames. First, you gave me a fucked-up name like Biscuit, and now you even want to change my gender. What kind of sins did I commit to receive this kind of treatment? Biscuit was full of resentment and wanted to find a corner to cry silently. Evan noticed Biscuit was looking at him with tear-filled eyes, so he raised an eyebrow. Is he moved that I called him my companion and saved him from Elora's predatory gaze that he is crying because of happiness? Evan thought inwardly and waved his hand in the bird's direction as if telling her, no need to thank me, it wasn't a big deal. It was a good thing that Biscuit wasn't someone from the cultivation world and was missing a special organ that people of cultivation novels use to spit out blood when they become angry. Otherwise, she would have definitely spat out almost all of her blood in anger after seeing Evan waving his hand. Damn it, why am I so weak? Biscuit wanted to beat down Evan, but her soul essence was under his control so she couldn't do anything. Evan didn't care about Biscuit after waving his hand as he was thinking about his next course of action. According to Elora, there will be many powerful monsters around the Pillar of Light. He thought as he gazed at the half-golden and half-black Pillar of Light. I don't know what kind of monsters I will encounter, but I will have to prepare thoroughly before going there. Evan waited for Elora to finish her food. And even though the meat she was eating was of a peak rank 2 monster, she easily ate it as if it were normal food. She is really not normal. Evan thought and shook his head because he knew it was impossible for normal people to eat the meat of a peak rank 2 monster. Do you want more? Evan asked while wiping her mouth once she finished her food. Hearing Evan, Elora shook her head and petted her belly with a satisfied look on her face. Full. Evan smiled when he heard her and stood up from the ground. Since you are full, then let's go. We still need to do many things. Evan also jumped down from Biscuit's back and looked around the structure, only to see some broken rocks and weeds as if no one had come here for ages. It seems even the monsters don't come here because of the aura coming out of the structure. Evan said to himself when he saw the surrounding area was completely devoid of life. Father, let's go. Evan suddenly heard Elora's voice and saw her climbing the stone stairs with a smile on her face. Evan shook his head when he saw her enthusiastic look and followed after her. While climbing the stairs along with Elora, Evan noticed the material from which the stairs were made was not normal. Even after using his 150 points of strength, he couldn't leave even a scratch on it. This stone is even more durable than normal low-level rank 2 materials. Evan thought inwardly as he looked at the giant dragon-type structure that was made of a similar stone as the stairs. Although the dragon statue was almost 800 meters tall, Evan and Elora reached the top of the stairs in a very short amount of time. Standing at the top of the stairs, Evan looked at the wide-open mouth of the dragon and used his spiritual senses and eyes of abyss to see if there was any danger inside the statue. After a few seconds of scanning, Evan didn't find any danger, so he stopped using his spiritual senses and the eyes of the abyss. But just to be on the safe side, he sent a few of his shadow undeads ahead of him. Once he sent his shadow undeads inside, he looked at Elora who wanted to dash inside and nodded his head. Seeing Evan nodding his head, Elora held his hand and pulled him inside. The moment Evan entered the dragon's mouth, the powerful aura that he was feeling from the structure intensified, but he wasn't affected by it. The aura coming out of the dragon's statue was like some sort of mind attack that wanted people to kneel in front of the statue, but as long as the will of the person was strong enough, this aura was completely useless. As Evan moved deeper inside the statue, he noticed many different types of engravings on the walls. Although the engravings looked simple at first sight, by using the eyes of the abyss, he noticed they were akin to some sort of a giant formation that covered the entire statue. What is this place, Elora? And what is the thing that you wanted to show me? After a few minutes of walking, Evan couldn't help but ask as they were just moving forward without doing anything. Just wait for a few minutes, father. We will soon reach our destination. Alora didn't answer Evan's question and just pulled his hand excitedly. Evan sighed when he saw this, but he didn't say anything and silently followed after her. Suddenly, he received a message from Volak, who was moving ahead of them. Using the shadow senses, he connected his vision with Volak and saw him standing in front of a closed room. Right beside the closed room, there were stairs leading to the lower areas of the statue. There is more than one floor here. Evan raised an eyebrow when he saw the stairs that were leading downwards and fell deep into thoughts. After thinking for a few seconds, he told Kazal and Eclipse, who were with Volak, to go to the lower areas of the statue using the stairs, and as for Volak, he asked him to check out the closed room. Hearing Evan's order, Eclipse and Kazal immediately used the stairs to go to the lower areas of the statue. As for Volak, he tried to open the door and surprisingly, it wasn't locked, so he easily opened it. Evan's vision was connected with Volak's vision through the shadow senses, so when the door opened, for a second, Volak's vision was blinded by a bright light, and when the light disappeared and Volak looked inside the room, Evan couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Evan gulped down his saliva and looked at the millions of high-level essence stones that were scattered inside the room. There must be at least a few 100 million high-level essence stones. He thought inwardly and quickened his pace. Soon, Evan and Alora reached the room that was filled with high-level essence stones, but to Evan's shock, Alora didn't stop in front of the room and wanted to pull him towards the stairs that were leading downwards. Wait, Alora. Evan stopped Alora and pointed towards the open door. Let me take away those things before we move. Hearing him, Alora stopped pulling his hand and looked at the mountains of essence stones inside the room, but upon seeing the essence stones, a confused look appeared on her face. Why do you want to collect trash, father? Evan was dumbfounded when he heard Alora, and he looked at her with a stupefied expression on his face. Did she just call the millions of high-level essence stones trash? Evan thought to himself and felt he needed to teach this brat the value of money. Although I gained millions of essence stones after killing Zorda and others, just thinking about the essence stones I need to use in order to allow Octavius to perform alchemy is giving me a headache. Evan said inwardly while rubbing his eyebrows. For a moment, he thought about the conversation he had with Octavius regarding the Solarian sunfruit, and just remembering what Octavius told him made his heart bleed. I need to collect more essence stones if I don't want to go bankrupt, he said to himself, and quickly went inside the room and placed all the essence stones that were there in his shadow storage. After putting away the essence stones, he quickly came out, and without saying anything, Alora led him towards the stairs and they moved towards the lower floor of the statue. While descending, Evan looked inside his shadow storage and tried to assess the amount of essence stones that he just received, and after a minute, he realized the numbers were more than 150 million high-level essence stones. With these essence stones, I at least don't have to worry about the Solarian sunfruit. Evan thought to himself and smiled slightly. Soon, they reached the end of the stairs and arrived the second floor of the statue. Using his shadow undeads, Evan found there were a total of 3 floors inside the dragon statue. Similar to the first floor, there was a room on the second floor of the statue as well, and just like before, Alora didn't stop there and wanted to pull him to the last floor. But Evan stopped her and told her he wanted to check the room before moving. Although Alora was confused as to why her father wanted to check these rooms since the thing she wanted to show him was on the last floor, she did not complain about it and followed him obediently. Standing some distance away from the second room, Evan ordered Kazal to open it. As Kazal opened the door, Evan grabbed Alora in his arms, ready to run at the sight of any danger. But luckily, just like the first room, there was no trap or danger inside the second room. Although there was no danger inside the room, Evan's face couldn't help but darken when the door was fully opened. It's empty, he muttered in a low voice as he saw the room was empty. He walked ahead of Kazal and entered the room, but even after entering inside, he didn't see anything. Seems like not every room is filled with treasures, Evan said while shaking his head and was about to leave, but stopped when he heard Alora. Father, look there. Evan looked at Alora and saw her pointing towards the ceiling of the room. Evan lifted his head and looked up, and when he looked up, his eyes widened in shock. Is that a core? He muttered in a shocked voice as he looked at a fist-sized golden-colored orb that was attached to the ceiling of the room. The orb wasn't releasing any aura, but when Evan looked at it, he felt as if a giant dragon was moving inside that small orb. Don't tell me this is the core of the rank 6 dragon who died here. He muttered while gulping his saliva and jumped up to grab it. The moment Evan's hand touched the core shone brightly and Evan felt as if he was standing in front of a giant golden dragon who was looking at him with cold eyes. At the same time, he felt a powerful pressure bearing down on his soul as if someone was trying to break his spiritual defense. A spiritual type attack. Evan immediately concluded what was happening and quickly activated his fear skill. The moment he activated his fear skill, his spiritual power surged and the pressure he was feeling on his soul disappeared. At the same time, the giant golden dragon who was standing in front of him started to break and soon shattered into countless pieces. As the dragon shattered into countless pieces, Evan found himself back inside the room, holding the golden-colored core in his hands. Mid-level rank 6 light dragon's core. Evan looked at the core in his hands and its details appeared in front of his eyes. Light dragon's core. Evan muttered in a low voice and was surprised that it was a mid-level rank 6 core instead of a beginner-level rank 6. A rank 6 dragon's core must be very rare, but I don't know what I can use it for. Evan thought to himself and decided to ask Octavius about it later on. Can we go now, father? Evan heard Elora's voice and saw her looking at him with anticipation-filled eyes. Sure, let's go. Evan looked around the room and when he didn't find anything else, he nodded his head and left with Elora and Kazal. Using the stairs that were beside the room, they descended towards the last floor. As they went down, Evan felt that the more they descended, the more powerful the aura he felt when he was outside of the statue became. Elora was very excited when they moved towards the last floor, so they reached the end of the stairs in less than a minute. As Evan's feet touched the ground of the last floor, he couldn't help but frown deeply because the ground of the last floor was dyed red. And just from a single look, he could tell the red color of the ground was not natural. Blood, he thought as he looked at the dried blood that painted the ground. He had sent Volak to the last floor ahead of him, but Volak didn't inform him about the dried blood because he did not find any danger here. Unlike Evan, Elora didn't care about the dried blood that covered the ground and continued to pull him towards the end of the floor. As they moved forward, the aura that Evan felt from the dragon's statue continued to become stronger. At the same time, for some reason, he felt the blood inside his body was moving more frantically as if it was excited. Soon Elora and Evan reached the end of the last floor and similar to other floors, there was also a room at the end of the last floor, but unlike other floors, there were no more stairs besides the room. Evan looked at the closed door of the room and noticed this door was at least 2 times the size of the previous 2 doors, and unlike those doors, there were many runes engraved on this door. As Evan looked at the door, the blood inside his body became even more restless and he had to do his best to control his heartbeat. We are here, father, Elora said with a smile on her face after stopping in front of the door. What is behind this door, Elora? Evan asked while taking a few deep breaths as it was the first time his blood showed such a reaction. Elora didn't reply to Evan and moved in front of the door. She looked at Evan with a smile on her face and without saying anything, pushed it open. Let's continue in next part.